Welcome everyone to this week's CAPC Cluster API Provider Azure weekly office hours. Today is Thursday, October 5th in the US Pacific time zone at least. And we are here on behalf of SIG Cluster Lifecycle. We're a part of the CNCF. We abide by the CNCF Code of Conduct for public meetings, so please be kind to one another. Raise hands. Use the raise hand feature of Zoom. We'd be delighted to call on anyone and hear all voices. At the beginning of the meeting, we would like to welcome anyone who's new or for any reason whatsoever to introduce yourself. So I'll go ahead and pause. And if you'd like to do so, please raise your hand and I'll call on you.
Hey everyone, I'm Aniruddha. I'm from India and I'm the maintainer of Cluster API provider HeadsNet and High Velocity. I came across this project and I'm happy to contribute to this Azure provider as well.
Thank you very much and welcome. Okay, going once, going twice. It looks like we are ready to start our regular agenda. Okay, I'm looking in the recurring topics to see if there's anything I need to worry about. I'll remind folks, if you have this doc open, which is linked in the CAPC Kubernetes Slack channel, to add yourself to the attendee list so we can have a recording of your presence. And I see Cecile just added an open discussion item, so feel free to do that async. But without further ado, we'll get to that section. And John, you are up first with caveats about ASO. Go for it.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, so I do have a PR open right now that does migrate all of the managed clusters and agent pools things to use ASO, which is cool. But I did discover a couple possible regressions that come with using ASO versus the SDK. One of them has to do with custom headers, which are no longer supported in, or I guess were never supported in ASO. And also it's not possible with ASO to delete all of the Azure tags on a managed cluster resource, which is something that we were testing for previously. And some minor, very minor type swizzling in the Go API types that we're considering. So if you have any feedback on things like that, please check out that message in Slack. I just sent that out yesterday, so it should be fairly close to the bottom of the list. But yeah, if anybody has any questions on any of that now, I'd be happy to answer those. Otherwise, please feel free to check that out in Slack. Yeah,
David, using the old-fashioned raise hand.
That's right, using the actual hand. I was like, I can't find the UI's changed for the Zoom meeting, so I was like,
I'm pretty sure if you had a if you had an M1 Mac, you would some sparklies would happen. I was chatting with my brother the other day, and he does, and every time he made any kind of gesture, there was like balloons or fireworks or rain or something.
Yeah, I see. I noticed it says recognize hand gesture, so I don't know.
Anyway, sorry for the digression. Please go.
Anyway, so yeah, I just wanted to know, John, is the difference in the features, is it something that it's just because ASO doesn't have the latest API version supported, or is it like just not at all there in the API somehow they're using? Like somehow the Go SDK is permanently better than whatever's there in ASO.
So I don't know if the SDK is necessarily better, but I think it's a little more flexible in how we use the SDK to actually like make API calls to Azure, where with ASO, that's a little bit more hidden from CAPZ's perspective, where we had a lot more control with that with the SDK. So yeah, I think it's mostly just a matter of how ASO is using the SDK, where some of those things aren't available to us as users of ASO.
Okay, so are these are things that we could then file as backlog items if we wanted in the ASO team, or not necessarily? It's just not going to be able to happen even if they do some kind of enhancements.
I think all of these things are possible for ASO to fix. The tags issue, there is an open issue for that currently. The custom headers is something that I don't think they're planning to fix, but if we absolutely need it, I think we can twist their arms to add that in for us because I think it is possible. Yeah, I think Jack,
ahead.
I think you were first.
Well, so let me try to rephrase the custom headers thing specifically. So I'm going to go a little bit higher level. So the custom headers thing is on the ground. It's a totally flexible key value interface that you can use to communicate with the AKS APIs. I think that it's non-controversial to say that that is a non-standard Microsoft / Azure way of implementing a standardized service API. So the fact that AKS actually takes action on that, as you can imagine, when you're formulating the underlying HTTPS response payload or request payload to the API, you're going to read through. There's probably dozens of RFCs that declare all sort of standard things that various HTTPS libraries support in their implementation. So this is just it seems someone on the AKS engineering side taking advantage of the fact that there's a subset of the HTTPS spec that isn't being used by the SDK system, and they're choosing that like opportunity to implement some various flags back and forth. But I think it's totally fair to call that a backdoor, not a standard feature interface. And certainly, if all the evidence we have is that the Azure SDK folks say that is not allowed, you shouldn't be doing that. So the fact that the Azure SDK, it's not that the SDK libraries we're using does that, it's that the SDK libraries we're using are closer to the ground, and we're able to essentially inject them and decorate the underlying HTTP payload properties with whatever we want to fulfill this sort of backdoor in AKS. So that wasn't actually as high level as I wanted to say. High level is that there seems to be a sort of orthogonal, non-standard backdoor, only a few people know about it, way of engaging certain AKS preview features that may or may not, matriculate to actual preview where they're actually a part of the API as definitive interface things that you declare, like strongly typed, feature Booleans or something like that. So I think from a high level, this is actually an improvement and a forcing function to standardize the AKS UX experience across platforms. And I think it's our job as Microsoft employees to communicate to AKS that these particular backdoors, if there are customers using those, they need to convert that into something standard. Because I think CapZ's story here is a symptom of the symptom that's going to happen generally across the ecosystem as any platform moves forward and gets further and further away from like totally manually implementing how to communicate with the APIs. So those backdoors are just not going to be exposed. So I don't think we should go to AS. I think that we'll be practical about it, but and David and folks in the PM community, if we can reach out to customers and get a sense if they're using these backdoors, that would be super helpful because we don't want to actually break customers. So we can be reasonable about it, I think. But I would advocate that we deprioritize the idea of advocating with ASO to implement this, because I think ASO is actually doing the right thing by sticking closer to the SDKs. Okay, Cecile, you raised your hand, but you lowered it probably because I talked for too long.
No, I was going to say something sort of similar to what you were saying, which is I added the links. Hopefully that helps for people who are wondering, what are these specific issues and how are they getting tracked? But yeah, like John said, first one is tracked in ASO, and it's kind of an AKS API issue, but we were working around it, but ASO doesn't work around it. And then the second one is the custom headers that Jack was talking about. And that seems like it's not something we want to support. In fact, ASO is saying that AKS is deprecating those as a way to interact with the API. So it's not something that we want to be adding to be forward-looking. So yeah, I guess the main thing is if you're out there and you're using custom headers with AKS for some reason, it would be great to know, because we haven't really found a valid use case yet, so we don't think it's necessary to keep it. But if that's not true, it would be good to know.
Go ahead, Nawaz.
My questions were around the same. I mean, if we are dropping out the custom headers, are we going to break customers? But then I think I got my answer. We still need to reach out and know if any customer is using the custom headers.
Yeah, cool. And to be clear, I think the canonical customer for that like this is someone with a close relationship to AKS PM. So maybe they are either a big company with like a lot of extra support, or maybe someone who just knows how the sausage is made in AKS, and they're using these custom headers as part of the CLI. So that this functionality is built into the AZ AKS CLI as far as I can tell. So that's also a sort of unfortunate thing that I think it's our job as Microsoft employees to communicate to AKS that there is certainly the AZ AKS CLI is a standardized tool. And so there's a delta between that and the SDK, which is also a standardized tool. So we need to do our jobs to try to get those folks to align. Go ahead, David. You're muted.
Still muted.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I think that this is a thing where it's not like we're just not going to do this because those features are there. Because the grander, larger picture is like, this is the track to, you know, like automating and filling all of the features that are missing because there's a lot of other things that we don't get today that we could try and one-off do with the Go SDK. But, you know, automating, you know, with our roadmap and our path, which I'm happy to talk about if people want to know more. It kind of depends on using ASO, this is one of the major reasons why we took the dependency in the first place. So I guess I'm just kind of echoing, let's continue to move forward, but I agree. Yeah, we can put notes or feedback, and you know, this community call and making it public is one way, but yeah, like in the release, once we do the migration, saying, hey, these things aren't going to work anymore, and do documentation, whatever we got to do. But yeah, I don't think we should walk on the lack of the features. It's my input. Go ahead, Nellis.
This may be not related, but then I was wondering what sort of features would we be dropping by dropping out of using the custom headers? Not sure if we want to broadcast it, or I'm not sure.
I think
This
that's
is from
actually that's a good
Microsoft.
question. That's a good question, Nawaz. I think the answer is that we can't tell because there's no definitive process around enabling or disabling the set of functionality that's exposed with custom header. Because you could pass a custom header. Again, it's like literally just decorating your HTTP header with arbitrary key value strings. So string key value string, and usually AKS will just ignore them. You know what I mean? It's not like it's not a feature that has as far as I can tell, a set interface with deterministic inputs and outputs. And so I don't think there's any way for us to know that what the complete set is. And I don't think that there's a standard process, as far as I can tell, around when a feature gets implemented, what is its life cycle? How long is it going to be in that feature state? So because it's all this stuff is sort of unofficial, the implementers of that particular HTTP header enabled feature could just remove that header at any time.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thanks so much for finding and broadcasting that, John. That's awesome. And if someone could put a link, I can do it myself later in here. I think your PR is ready for review. Is that right? So soliciting reviewers.
Yes. Yep.
Great work. Okay, that was a sufficient amount of time for that. Cecile, you're up with single stack IPv6 regression in Kubernetes 128 sad face.
Yeah, so this is kind of more of a PSA also, just because I've been looking at this. This has been an ongoing thing for a while, but just wanted to bring a bit more visibility to it. So essentially, we found that there's a change in Kubernetes 128 to enforce more validation in the kubeproxy. And those validations were meant to only be warning about and failing for things that were already failing before. However, there was one that was added particularly that affects Azure IPv6 single stack because of the way it works, in the sense that in Azure, there's no single stack IPv6 host, so you'll always have a dual stack host underneath. And that specifically breaks now because kubeproxy won't start, and so the IPv6 address can't get assigned to the node, and so it's kind of a deadlock situation. So essentially, it took a while to like track down what that was actually getting like caused by, but I think I have a good idea now, and I opened an issue in Kubernetes yesterday and actually already got answer from the original PR author. And looks like they already opened a fix, which is great. So this is making some good progress. Originally, when I put this down, I thought this was going to be a more pessimistic announcement, but it looks like we're on a good way to having a fix soon. And so yeah, just wanted to give an FYI in case anyone is using single stack IPv6, don't move to 128 yet. And then as part of this work, I'm also working on adding like tests in our dashboards so that we're testing both single stack IPv6 and dual stack with every release of Kubernetes, or every release branch of Kubernetes and Kubernetes at head, so that in the future, if something like this happens, we can know before the release, which wasn't the case this time. So yeah, any questions on this?
Okay, cool. I have some questions, but I'm gonna wait a little bit longer. No one else?
Oh, one thing to note is this does not affect AKS because AKS does not support single stack, only dual stack. So this is only for KABZ or self-managed Kubernetes, which use single stack IPv6.
Cool. Is there a test infra PR open with the additional test coverage?
So there's 2 PRs in test infra that already merged that added the test for pre-submit. And then I'm adding the template in a KABZ PR right now and testing that PR with the pre-submit test that is optional. And then once the KABZ PR merges, then I will make another test infra PR that adds the periodic jobs. But the template that we need to test doesn't exist yet.
Got it. Got it. So the pre-submit job that merged, does that actually work in upstream in at KK? Like, is that going to be informing signal for the fix to this?
No, this is for KABZ pre-submit, not KK.
I see. Got it.
Yeah, I will probably I need to do this today, but probably try to see if I can run some manual one-time test to validate the fix. Might be a bit tricky, but yeah, the jobs I'm implementing test Kubernetes at CI, not at a custom build.
Right. Cool. Is this related to the refactor that happened like 9 months ago that you and I were involved in, at least as observers? I was clicking through to see if one of the PRs linked in the chain of that PR that we were. Well, I seem to recall there was a refactor of the way that single stack and dual stack were reconciled in Kubelet Bootstrap that you and I were watching like 6 to 9 months ago.
That doesn't ring a bell, but if you're able to find a link, that would be very interesting.
Yeah, I can do that async.
So essentially, like the specific PR that broke this, we know which one it is because it's very clear. And what that PR did is it made something that wasn't failing before a fatal error. So that's wrong. That's a regression, no matter what. But then there's another question underlying, which is why was this in the first place a valid thing to do? Because it's not a valid thing to do. So, and that's where maybe cloud provider Azure is doing some stuff in the way it assigns the IP to the node that doesn't go with the kubeproxy typical expectations.
Right. Well, I recall.
So that's where.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
That's where maybe that refactor would be interesting to look at. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just try to find that PR. I recall that the particular scenario that Azure's in, where it implements single stack in quotes, because the underlying virtual machine is actually dual stack enabled, was not something that was widely known to the Kubernetes maintainers. And there were particular parts in the code that didn't make sense to the maintainers to support the fact that it was single stack running on dual stack. And the sort of intuition from the maintainers is like, let's get rid of this stuff. And then folks were like, no, that's actually going to break Azure. We need this thing that looks weird in the abstract, because in fact that weird. So there was like discussion about how to make that single stack on top of dual stack more like well commented in code, the various like if conditions that are going on during bootstrap. Anyway, I'm digressing. I'll try to find that up async, and if I find relevant conversations, I'll link to this issue so we can have a better idea of the backstory. Nice work, Cecile. May I ask how we discovered this? Because we don't test this in CAPC. User feedback?
I ran a manual test by chance.
Manual
Not
test
a
by
great
chance.
answer. I was trying to find something else.
there.
We were investigating another IPv6 related issue, and I happened to be like, let me check if it repros with 128, and then found that 128 was broken in a whole other way.
Cool. I'm sure that only took like a half hour of your time.
More or less.
Okay. Yeah, thanks so much. On to David. Is this David T, I assume? Reuse Azure Service Operator for IAC. I guess there's only one David these days, generally.
Yep.
You're up.
That's me. Yeah, so we just had this issue come up, but I wanted to just throw out the idea, because this functionality is now starting to, I would say, go, the requested functionality is starting to go away from core CAPZ, because you're now asking for basically ASO features in CAPZ, right? Which I like this idea. Some of you know, I've talked about this before since someone else filed it, coincidentally. But it is an interesting pivot because of that fact, right? And so with that in mind, my question is, does it make sense to add in the traditional cluster CTL, or could it make things easier or better or a distinguished experience if we just did it on, let's say, the CAPI operator Helm chart? Like we plumb that feature there all the way through to, into installing CAPZ in that manner. So,
Okay, cool.
I mean,
I would-
obviously you have to do some coding. Obviously, you have to do some coding work to light up the ASO install pattern so you can install other CRDs, right? But the question is, how do you bring that? What's the right way or desired way we should bring that plumbing through all the way back to the users doing the install? And today, obviously, we've been heavily on cluster CTL, and that's kind of the tests, and a lot of things do that. But yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I think it would be possible even today to do some of that with cluster CTL, since mostly the extra CRDs you could configure to install for ASO are basically just a string. So I think we could, in theory, throw those in an environment variable, and then cluster CTL could pick that up and plumb that through all the way to the templates. I think the main thing that you would lose going that route is, I can't remember if it's a label or an annotation on the CRDs where cluster CTL move would then notice those CRDs and then move them in a cluster CTL move operation. But I think at least getting the CRDs installed with cluster CTL is possible today.
But yeah, but that versus, let's say you don't use cluster CTL and you just use the Helm chart to put in that string and pass it into the install.
Yeah, I think that would work just as easily.
But would that have any downfalls of what you talked about?
Yeah, that would have the same
downfall.
Caveats. I think I would have to check it out
Okay.
more, but I'm pretty sure.
Okay. Any other thoughts or inputs on that? I think or the general concept of something that is now not necessarily a core CapZ functionality that we're enabling, and that being in cluster CTL or not, and being in, you know, or the copy operator Helm chart or not. Go ahead, Cecile.
Yeah, I think just to warn against the use of environment variables for cluster CTL, I think in this case it would be part of init, right? Not part of the cluster generate. So the environment variables would need to be in the like infrastructure components, which we had at some point with like the service principal and the Azure environment variable, but there was a move or push I remember in CAPI to get rid of environment variables in the infrastructure component specifically. So I think now we're back where we don't need them anymore, but I would need to check where that conversation landed. Just yeah, because that might be tricky if cluster CTL got rid of variables at that stage. And I can find the exact discussion I'm talking about.
So I'm going to ask a question. I pasted in chat, but I don't know if anyone's read that. What exactly does the user want here? Is it the convenient bootstrapping, or is it the opinionated particular ASO resources that CAPZ uses from release to release? Like, what is the value to the user? Is it that, okay, this project is scrutinizing these very particular ASO resources at a particular version for particular Kubernetes outcomes, and I want to get all that good green testing validation. So I want to make sure that the ASO resources I use are the ones that have undergone testing. Or is it just or that cluster CTL init gesture is super convenient? I wish I could do that. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is the convenient bootstrapping, because they do want to install other resources, right? I mean, it's like there's going to be highly likely other things that people need to install in their infrastructure, and if they're already taking the bet on having a CAPZ management controller, like it'd be nice to just do that all in one shot versus now having to install ASO separately and have CAPZ and then try and maintain both of those installations, right? And so this really would slipstream the whole process for that user experience, where they can just install it and get whatever they need to run. Like, just then they can apply ASO or CAPZ definitions against the cluster, right? And be good.
Cool, that makes sense. That sounds like the only way to do that well would be a new tool that would be shared in common by users like this and CAPZ to install ASO at cluster creation time. No?
And that's what I'm saying. I think the CAPI Helm chart has a lot of flexibility, so I think that's one way to do it.
But using a CAPZ specific workflow to enable configuration that's beyond the scope of CAPZ seems dubious to me. Then we're on the hook for supporting that.
Right. Well, no, I know, and that's why I brought this up in the meeting, because it is now a departure from, like, we're doing something that's not pure CAPZ, that's inside a CAPZ realm, right? And so I think it makes sense. I do think that there can be a point where you start to go too far. What that line is, I don't know, but I feel like if you're really running this on any kind of scale, the operator's kind of the way to go, and then Helm chart offers a lot of advantages. But I don't know, if you do light this up, is it something where it needs to be in cluster CTL and CAPI operator, or are we saying, like you said, Jack, like, no, we cannot support this inside that realm because it's not a purist CAPZ feature?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word cannot. We definitely can. I don't think we should.
Okay. Oh, I would love other ideas then. Yeah.
Is this a gap in ASO? Does ASO have a end-to-end gap in their delivery, in their offering? Like, if ASO had an easy way to bootstrap itself across, like, I just want these ASO resources on my Kubernetes cluster in a single gesture, would that solve this problem for this user? And ostensibly for us as well, would we use that gesture instead of cluster CTL? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, so ASO does make it fairly easy to install only whatever CRDs you want, and ASO itself will manage all those CRDs like across upgrades and all that kind of thing. So I don't think there's a gap there if you're using pure ASO, but I think the rub between CABZ and ASO is that cluster CTL expects CRDs to be managed one way, ASO expects CRDs to be managed another way, and those two ways aren't super compatible with each other.
Yeah, so there is, yes, that makes sense, because there is more of a slipstream like experience that we're kind of providing. We're already down this path, right? We're already shipped with it under the hood. It's already installed. And so now there's some different ways of things that work. So if you say, hey, here's we know you want CABZ and the ASO experience, like we're kind of leading people down the happier co-integration path versus just roll your own and hope those two things pan out.
Right. Well, I think we should probably time box this, but my particular instinct as one person is that if there's additional value beyond CAPZ in the particular opinionated way that we scaffold ASO that other projects want to take advantage of, that sounds to me like a new project that those folks and CAPZ would depend on. That sounds like the way to do it right. It doesn't sound right to extend the way that CAPZ is using things inside CAPZ to accommodate additional use cases that have nothing to do with CAPZ. But I think we should probably time box this because we've got more.
Yeah, I think we can like maybe time box this and move on to the next one. But yeah, it's
super cool that you've discovered something more generally useful than you thought, John, folks.
Okay. Yeah, can go to the next.
Okay, so you're up for the next agenda item.
Yeah, so this one's just I don't know, like a shout out if anybody has tried using I mean I did finally get did get the CAPZ working with the manual instructions, but I have not. It's a little omnious on how I would make that work with the CAPI operator, and I'm just wondering if anybody's tried to do that. And obviously, then there's no documentation as far as I know. Workload identity. Sorry, but yeah, so I think, and then if the question is if no one has done it and my likely probably doesn't have any documentation, would that be something that you think should file in the CAPI operator thing or more of the CAPZ repo because it's kind of a CAPZ specific type of thing? Go ahead, Cecile.
So sorry, this is a basic question, but what does the cluster identity have anything to do with CAPI operator or the way that providers are managed? This doesn't quite make sense to me.
Well, so you know, with the current instructions, you know, they kind of give like, hey, use, you know, the traditional like variables when you install via Helm chart to install the CAPZ via CAPI operator, which makes sense, right? But there's obviously a bunch of other steps in the workload identity CAPZ setup, which is the way forward in the blessed future, right? So I feel like it's confusing as to like how would I actually make workload identity work using the Helm chart from CAPI operator, and it's, I mean, maybe that's not possible, maybe it is, maybe I just, you know, haven't tried to play with it enough to make it work or don't understand enough to make it work, but yeah, I'm very familiar with Helm, and obviously the install, it's just making those things like test them out and see if they work is the thing I would like to see happen. Go ahead, Cecile.
Yeah, I mean, so Ashutosh might have more context or ideas, but the way I understand it, for workload identity, you basically just need your management cluster to have that service account, and then you need some label on the deployment of CAPZ to enable it to use that service account, right? So I think it might just be a matter of just changing the Helm chart to enable that, like to add that label that was added in the original CAPZ PR in the deployment. But other than that, nothing should be different. Like you're just setting up like your Kubernetes cluster to have that service account token. But yeah, Ashutosh.
Yeah, I think we don't need labels anymore with the latest releases. But we do need an spec. It's called Azure AD token something into the deployment file of CAPZ operator. So we need that to be present. So I think if we are talking in terms of Helm chart changes, that is what we will need. And I don't see anything apart from that we need to make workload identity possible. So if you see in the CAPZ manager deployment spec, there is a spec specifically for workload identity. That's what we need. Is that help? Oh yes, yeah, it's a Azure identity token, right? So the link is for it's a volume.
Okay, so it's probably possible, but it sounds like it probably needs some plumbing on the CAPI operator Helm chart potentially. Does that sound about right?
I don't know much about CAPI operator. I heard it first time. So if CAPI operator is all about having a Helm chart, which I can take it and I just do Helm install and it all deploys everything. Then yeah, the only thing that we would need is this plumbing.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of, I mean, this is part of, trying to, like, ideally the alternate path forward, right? Getting people away from cluster CTL and the production kind of way we want to try and push people in CAPI, I think. So me even writing the updated quick start, I don't want to start people off on, the kind of deprecated pod identity authentication method. And so I'd love to get that. So where should I file the issue? Do you think it would be a CAPZ thing or a CAPI operator? Folks have any thoughts one way or the other? Go ahead, Cecile.
Can you point us to the Helm chart that cluster API operator maintains for Azure? Is there a Helm chart? Is that in
there?
That
is, yeah. It's a Helm chart. It just kind of
operator?
wraps. Yeah, it just wraps like you can just specify which infrastructure provider you want, and it just sucks down and does the install. I haven't looked into the code behind it, but yeah, it's just like one Helm chart and installs. That Helm chart installs and pulls down any provider. That's
okay.
it.
So it's generic. There isn't like a specific Azure one. Okay, so then we wouldn't be able to add anything in cluster API operator, since there's no Azure specifics.
But then they do have the ability to put in your credentials via a YAML file. So I think they just subsume that in their chart, like with the credentials side. So I think that there is a part of the Helm chart that allows you to kind of custom put your own stuff in there. So you can today, right? And one-liner and install and configure all of CAPI and the Azure provider in a single install, like one line, and it's all done for you. Right.
Do you have a pointer to those credentials?
I can point you to, I'll update the doc, but yeah, there's already, it's in the quick start just for the CAPI operator. Yeah, they're just basic install actually has an Azure reference. But yeah.
Okay.
EOM, end of message. Church should not be under hack. Yes, I agree there. Which is a good segue to the next question, I think. Unless somebody has other thoughts on this. Asutosh, Cecile, you both have your hands up still.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, David, I mean, it looks more appropriate to at least file into this API operator if you want to do that. And then we can investigate and go forward on how we can do that.
Yeah, just trying to simplify the overall experience, right, for people. As it's like the cluster CTL and the current quick start for CAPI is still really long, and it's even longer as you add workload identity. And so I think like it's possible that if we use the operator and wrap it with Helm chart and things, we might be able to slipstream some of that, but I don't know. Yeah. Go ahead, Cecile.
Yeah, sorry, I just took a quick look at the doc. So the way they're doing it, using the environment variables for the credentials and then putting that in a Kubernetes secret, that's the deprecated way. That's been deprecated in CAPZ since like CAPZ 1.6 or something. That's not even workload identity. That's pre-AD pod identity. They're not even using AD pod identity in the quick start instructions. The new way of doing credentials in CAPZ is via like multi-tenancy, where you don't put any credentials in your like CAPZ deployment, right? You only put the credentials per cluster in an Azure Cluster Identity CRD. So there should not be any credentials involved when you do like init or install the Azure provider. The only thing is your management cluster needs to be set up in a way that the like workload identity is like set up on the cluster, and then also the deployment of CAPZ needs to have that extra volume that Ashutosh was mentioning. But if they're pulling the like install components directly from our releases, they should have those. So I think it might already just be working. It's just that the instructions are outdated.
Okay, this is really important info. I think we need to like probably update the docs or relay that info. And obviously, I mean, this is helpful for me to try and like work towards that end, so that we could say, how could I enable CAPZ with the operator that is in a proper workload identity way to do everything? Because right now, right, like, yeah, you're like you're saying, this is like super old and really undesired way to do the auth. That's not clear. Yeah. Okay. So to try and wrap this issue, do you think maybe at least for the authentication one, maybe that's a CAPI operator one, but like for getting this to work on workload identity, maybe that's a CAPC issue? Does that sound fair? Like kind of a testing one or doc?
The doc issue is definitely CAPI operator, and then whether it works, I think that might just require some testing because it might just already work. And if it doesn't work and we find issues, then it depends what those issues are and where they need to be fixed.
Okay, cool. All right, thanks. Okay. So the last point I had, hopefully this one's a little bit shorter. I know I brought this up once or twice in the past briefly, but I think just, you know, if the call out, if anybody's already done this or not yet, but you know, the thinking is you would have two lines here in the bigger picture of people getting bootstrapped and quick started if they want to install a managed cluster. One is the Helm command to do the operator and the CAPZ infrastructure install. The second command would be to actually deploy a managed cluster, right? Today you have to do clusterctl, and then that generates a thing, and then you got to like hack that and, you know, do that, versus the alternative to that in my head still is I just do a Helm command to pull the Helm chart, which has all of the options available for me to create a managed cluster, right? And I just specified some maybe different switches, the name, and whatever else I want into that Helm chart, and then apply that. And so you really, you know, shortcut the hacking of the clusterctl generating, going to YAML file, edit the YAML file, doing all that stuff, and then applying. You do kind of more of a one-line thing, and then the value would be if there was a Helm chart that was maintained, you kind of make sure that all the options are there, and you can link to them and that kind of thing. And so I just wanted to throw out that idea and see if that's something someone's already tried to do a Helm chart for already, or not. And then if not, like if that would be something we'd be open to put into the actual CAPZ repo itself. Hey, Jack.
I wonder if anyone, probably Cecile in particular, could describe the historical choice to use clusterctl at all over Helm, because I think that there's functional overlap there. I think using Helm and CAPZ would be somewhat controversial because the documented way to do all these things in CAPI across all the ecosystems is clusterctl. So I think the more durable approach would be to revisit this in CAPI, but I know that's like huge. Do you know the background, Cecile or Ashutosh, you do?
I don't have a background. I'll speak after.
Well, you're raising your hand, so you can speak.
I'll just answer Jeff's question. I don't think it's as mysterious or controversial as you think. I think it's just that that's the way it evolved naturally. I don't think it's that controversial. There was some discussion about having more templating, like more sophisticated templating in CAPI at some point. I can try to dig up the issue.
I recall that.
There was a little bit of controversy in terms of like choosing a single templating tool and having that be the best way to do templating in CAPI. But I think people recognize that cluster.ctl is more of like a quick start thing, not like a sustainable production use way to manage hundreds of clusters.
Yeah, I would. I know we're being recorded, but I would go on record in favor of deprecating cluster.ctl and just having folks use Helm, so they have one less tool in their kit. But I don't know all the ins and outs of why that might be controversial to folks, because it's not clear to me the general value of cluster.ctl.
So cluster.ctl, sorry, Ashutosh, I just want to answer this. The main value, like proposition, is for it to manage the providers, not install clusters. Like from the start, like if you look at the quick start docs, it's essentially cluster.ctl and cluster API operator have the exact same like purpose.
Well, yeah, I know that. Yeah.
The derived like feature of like it lets you generate templates to create clusters. That's not part of the core feature set. That's more of a quick start guide kind of thing, right? So yeah, I think cluster.ctl as a way to create the workload clusters is not the recommended way, but there's still the other like aspect of like I want to be able to initialize my management cluster, upgrade my providers, etc., install cert manager, all that stuff.
Right, but because all those functional gestures can be handled by Helm, it would seem a win from a user perspective to have Helm install the providers and then also have, it's going to be a different Helm command. Go ahead.
That's what CAPI operator is trying to do, right? That's the whole point. It's trying to replace cluster.ctl with Helm. But I think what David is mentioning here is a bit different. It's like Helm chart to install the clusters themselves.
That's right. Yeah. So then that way you never have to actually use cluster.ctl. You don't even have to like download the binary. Like you just literally use Helm to install all of the cluster API stuff and the CapZ, and then you just do one other Helm again to actually apply the repo. You never touch cluster.ctl.
Right. Well, my point is that you could do that now, but cluster API, the CAPI operator is also not required. I'm saying Helm can do all this stuff. So there's some historical reason why Helm isn't just why are these things not rendered as Helm charts with Helm repos, and instead they're rendered as novel projects with their own unique feature sets like cluster.cl and cluster API. I don't know the historical background of that, but it as an objective person who doesn't know anything, I could kind of empathize with where you're coming from, David. As a user, it seems a bit strange and unfortunate that as a naive user coming to this project, there's more, I have to worry about more tooling. It'd be nice. I've already got Helm. I'd love to just do a Helm install command and try it out. And that certainly seems possible. They're all just represented as Kubernetes resources, so Helm can totally do that.
So sorry, Ashutosh, we keep cutting you off.
Ashutosh is raising it.
No, that's all right. I was just saying that plus one to this idea, David. Like I personally also felt not too comfortable using cluster.ctl to generate templates. Like it would have been more easy to use like Helm and do this deployment of the clusters. But having said that, I think cluster.ctl also serves one more purpose of doing cluster pivoting that is documented in CAPI. Like the customers whom I have interacted with, they do create a workload cluster and then they move that workload cluster to make it a management cluster. So in that regard, I have found cluster.ctl very useful. So I don't know if we can make a statement that a cluster CTL will go away or we will not be able to use it. But yeah, I see cluster CTL as that this tool also has a way to generate templates. So, but I would personally prefer Helm chart for sure for these templates. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I think that the production kind of way of doing things in that mode, you'd ideally be using like GitOps and other things, to where a move would be, it would look different, right? You know, if you had everything in source code and GitOpsified, then you could more easily move the you know, things around without using cluster CTL. So it looks different. And that's where I mean, obviously there's a number of different use cases there, and we'd have to flush all those out. But I know that's what the operator has been trying to achieve and think about, right? Because the other thing that's the downfall and one of the reasons why the operator's there is, right, because cluster CTL is a scripting mechanism towards tens or hundreds of management clusters, right? Like that's kind of not the best experience either, you know? So,
yeah.
So, you know, having to script that around is kind of sucky versus just having it in YAML and GitOps and you're done, you know? But anyway,
Agreed.
yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. All right. I think that's it for me. Thanks.
Well, I think we didn't really speak to the public Helm chart for CAPZ managed clusters. Sure, we could totally do it. Do we want to do it?
I'm even down to help with it. I just wanted to like make sure I'm not going to be met with like, oh my gosh, no, don't do that.
Well, I would advise, this is just my own feeling, I would advise bringing this to CAPI and seeing if the CAPI community would appreciate CAPZ taking the lead and trying this out as a way of improving the day zero experience for naive users. And so if we could replace the current QuickBook instructions with a single Helm install gesture, would that be something that would be of interest to CAPI generally? And then we could prove that out and then
so I can file
to make that standard, because that's the thing that I would,
yeah.
If CAPZ does something that we think is really cool, the downside is that other providers might have different opinions about what's cool, and then quick starts become even more heterogeneous than they are, and that's probably not something we want to do.
Yeah, well, so I'm happy to file an issue. I have not filed an issue on this yet. I did bring it up in the like many months ago, I think, with the CAPI community meeting. I'd have to figure out which one that was, but I haven't filed an issue. So do you feel like this is an issue? Because the Helm chart creation for CAPZ is specific to CAPZ, but if we want the general, like, you know, does CAPI fundamentally have any objections or support for like providers doing the install of their clusters via Helm charts? Like, is that something you feel is worthy of filing an issue, Cecile or Jack?
I was talking about a CAPZ issue, but I think Jack was going another direction.
Okay.
Yeah, feel free to ignore my direction. Sounds like a totally normal way to go about things. Is a CAPI issue that's, you know, replace clusters, replace quick start commands with a single Helm install command, and then bring that into an agenda item and offer to the CAPI operator community that would be the de facto way that this would work. So the Helm chart would have all the CAPI operator foo, so that would then set the user up for success for all of those gestures, move, etc., with CAPI operator from the get-go. So Helm install, and you're good to go.
Okay, yeah, I think I'll just take the existing quick start issue that I already have, that's on the CAPI repo, and they already are supportive of having a CAPI operator install path, like in the actual public book. So I'll just use that as the opportunity to showcase this and maybe just whip up a basic Helm chart for CAPZ managed clusters, and just to show the experience and then see how that resonates versus file a CAPI issue on it. So, and I will file an issue on CAPZ repo for the Helm chart thing. And so yeah, I think we can move on. Unless somebody else has any other feedback. Thank you. Cool.
Well, because we finished early, we can give you minutes of your time back, everyone. Thanks everyone for attending. Great to see everybody. Happy
Thanks for hosting,
Thursday.
Jack.
Thanks, Jack.